Spencer Hannah Catherine, the Green Party, 14,980. So I hereby declare that Hannah Catherine Spencer is duly elected Member of Parliament for the Gorton and Denton constituency.
Quiet Riot.
Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School, the weekend crayon to Thursday's quill and ink. I'm Alex.
And I'm Kenny.
How are you, Kenny?
I'm just luxuriating in another quiet news week. Fabulous. Nothing to do, nothing to read. I've just been left alone. Nothing happened. I've had a great night's sleep every single night. I haven't had to be up at 4 o'clock in the morning once, and I've not once wakened up to the Third World War kicking off yet again.
There's a kind of relief to it happening finally.
You sound like a man who's been constipated on current affairs.
Well, yeah, it kind of is, you know. Waiting for Third World War is bound to be worse than actual Third World War.
This is going to hurt us much more than it hurts Trump.
Anyway, so another quiet selection of news items for us to pick through. Have you thought of anything that we might discuss? Anything at all?
You know, we are definitely back into too much news territory, aren't we? I do kind of think that the Chop Topics choose themselves this week.
Mm-hmm.
So let's be grown-ups and see if we can make some sort of sense of the chaos that's unraveling in Iran and the wider Middle East, I suppose.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the BAFTAs then.
That's one for you, thespian man.
Yeah, and talking of chaos, I think we do need to look at that result in Gorton and Denton in some detail, and also look at the reaction to it and maybe try to understand whether anyone at all seems to have learned anything vaguely useful from it.
Spoiler alert incoming.
Quiet Riot. We can go now to our Middle East correspondent, John Donaldson. Morning to you, John. There's been a lot happening in the past hour and a half or so. Tell us about the situation first in Israel itself.
Well, here, about an hour and a half ago, we awoke to the sound of sirens going off across Jerusalem. They are anticipating in the coming hours and days there will be some sort of response from the Iranians. We had a statement at the same time from, I'm just on my phone at the moment, I've got the alert coming through from the Israeli Home Front Command telling us that there
John,
is a
it's
possible
Naga. Sorry
missile
to
threat.
interrupt. Do you need to go now that alert is on your phone? We need to just know that for safety.
Well, here we are again. In Iran, the alarms sound. The American-Israeli missiles, they rain down. Smoke hangs in the air near the downtown offices of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. In Qatar and the UAE, American bases come under missile attack, and in Israel, many start their day in bomb shelters. It's a perilous moment for the Middle East and, by extension, for everybody else too. While the pretext for America's attacks has been Iran's controversial nuclear facilities, the endgame, if indeed the Trump administration has an actual endgame, is regime change. Now, whatever one's views of this weekend's attacks, there is likely to be a shortage of sympathy for Iran's brutal leadership. Just weeks after the authorities there slaughtered thousands of anti-government protesters, there has been a growing sense that many Iranians really have nothing left to lose, and that any change is better than continuing with the murderous status quo. But Iran's authoritarian leadership has been backed into a corner, and there is nothing to suggest that it will do anything other than fight to the bitter end, whatever that looks like. All right, Alex, as we record and everything is still breaking around us in news terms, what do we actually know?
More as a way of setting out the framework at the current time while we record, rather than trying to give people the latest. Shortly after 6 a.m. UK time, Iranian media reported explosions in the capital, Tehran. BBC showed images of smoke over the city's Jamhuri Square and Hassanabad Square. Explosions were reported in multiple other cities across the country. Trump posted a video on Truth Social shortly thereafter, confirming that the US was involved. And he concluded the video by saying, "When we are finished, take over your government. You probably won't get a chance for generations." Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu echoed that, calling on all Iranian people, and I quote, to throw off the yoke of tyranny and bring about a free and peaceful Iran. You know, they're not making any secret of the fact that if not the goal, then certainly the hope is of regime change as a result of this. Now, following that, about lunchtime, UK time, Iran launched a big host of counterattacks on Israeli targets, on United States bases in the region, and several targets it sees as adversaries or friendly to the US, like Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. UK nationals, we should say, in Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Oman, but also Turkey, importantly, have been told to remain vigilant and take shelter if advised to do so. The extent of any casualties or injuries is completely unknown as we record, but the IDF, the Israeli military, has told Reuters that many senior figures of the Iranian leadership have been killed or injured.
A little bit earlier, President Trump said in a social media post that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is dead. He went on to say, quote, he was unable to avoid our intelligence and highly sophisticated tracking systems, and working closely with Israel, there was not a thing he or the other leaders that have been killed along with him could do. This is the single greatest chance for the Iranian people to take back their country. Now, Iranian state media say that Mr. Khamenei is still alive.
So that's really the factual matrix as we note at this precise point. Now, going back to the build-up to this attack, which I think many people expected at some point. I mean, no one knew the precise timing, no one knew the breadth of it, I guess, but it had been anticipated because effectively it takes a long time to move assets into the region, and we knew that America was moving assets into the region. So can you remind us a little bit about what preceded it, I guess?
Without doing a sort of a full history of the Middle East, in my lifetime, there's at least 40 years of bad blood between the US and Iran. But the tensions, as you say, have been ramping up relentlessly in the last year. In June last year, as we all remember, America bombed Iran's nuclear and military facilities a couple of times. Trump claimed that the sites were completely and totally obliterated, though independent assessments suggested that actually they'd been damaged and that there wasn't actually permanent elimination at all. Subsequent to that, Iran then curtailed its cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, and it reduced nuclear transparency, and that kind of deepened Western concerns, quite obviously. Then we fast forward to this year, and in recent weeks we've watched as America has moved the biggest aircraft carrier in the world into the Mediterranean. It's built up its biggest military presence in the Middle East since the Gulf War. And all this, while in the background, Trump has been warning that any failure in negotiations would bring serious consequences. Now, there is a legitimate question about whether those negotiations were actually ever to be taken seriously. Do we consider that this is a failure of diplomacy, or whether it's simply the inevitable outcome of months and months of planning by the Americans?
There have been negotiations going on, and we have had very generic making progress. This is all very encouraging type noises coming from them, but nothing really specific for a long time. There was a general sense that, in a strange way, both sides were just going through the motions and playing for time, really. I would like to defer to Donald Trump's words.
There's the first.
Yeah, because in 2013, he posted on Twitter, as it then was, "Remember that I predicted a long time ago that President Obama will attack Iran because of his inability to negotiate properly, not skilled."
There's always a tweet from that clown.
Yeah. And even better, I think, is Stephen Miller's tweet from the last election campaign, who posted, "To anyone still gullible enough to fall for scummy media hoaxes."
Scummy media hoaxes.
Trump said warmongering neocons love sending your kids to die for wars they would never fight themselves. Liz Cheney is Kamala's top advisor. Liz wants to invade the whole Middle East. Kamala equals World War III. Trump equals peace.
There we go. There we go. I mean, it's good that we laugh because it's so depressing in its transparency as well, isn't it?
How that Nobel Committee did not consider this titan of peace for the prize, I will never know.
I think what's striking is that actually, talking about striking while those talks were ongoing, and without explaining in full the calculus to allies or to Congress, the administration has materially weakened the bargaining position that it had spent weeks, at least appearing to cultivate. But nobody is really surprised.
As a listener, I think very wisely put it, Chris. He wrote in to say, as the old Latin proverb says, if you want peace, you must prepare for war, and then start a war, and then start another war, and then do some war stuff, and then start a third really big war. And then you have a desert with just rubble on it, so you can just call that peace and go home.
There's a book in that.
Yeah, this is very much what we're seeing here. We're seeing a confluence of money interests, political difficulty that this alleviates, a president who is basically having some difficulty playing with domestic toys, exercising the executive power that he does have, which is over military action to a certain extent, although, as you say, he has overreached, I think, significantly on this occasion. But it's also another nail in the coffin for any notion of international order, I think.
Absolutely.
International allies, it's plain to me they weren't really consulted in any meaningful way or even knew this was coming until the very last moment. Keir Starmer had a Cobra meeting today, Saturday, followed by phone calls with Chancellor Merz and President Macron to discuss, I guess, a European stance to this. Not that it particularly matters, but it's being unified matters rather than scattered.
It's almost, it's that Wizards of Oz moment where the curtain gets drawn back and we all get reminded that an awful lot of the people in an awful lot of very senior positions are just not necessarily particularly well suited for the roles that they've managed to fill. When I heard that bombs had finally started to drop, my initial reaction was actually a sense of just such deep disappointment. Is this the best that we can manage in the 21st century? And then there was that immediately followed by just a sense of resignation. You kind of go, well, yeah, we're not surprised this has happened. And if it hadn't happened today, it would certainly have happened within the next week. All the signs were there. Just so very disappointing.
Finally, to the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. Don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations. America is backing you with overwhelming strength and devastating force. Now is the time to seize control of your destiny and to unleash the prosperous and glorious future that is close within your reach. This is the moment for action. Do not let it pass.
And as you hinted in the introduction, it's not like the Iranian regime has any fans or supporters or defenders. If this did result in meaningful regime change, not like in Venezuela, where basically you just replaced one authoritarian with their deputy, it's just that their deputy has agreed to give you loads of money. But if this brings meaningful democratic change in Iran, everyone will be delighted. And I think a lot of people in Iran do feel that there is nothing left to lose. But they will also be just deeply frightened right now.
Yeah.
No one knows when the next bomb will fall and where. And so it's difficult. And I'm sure a lot of them feel also that Trump telling them to go out and protest and we've got your back a few weeks ago, when really he did not. And a lot of them got slaughtered.
Hobson's choice. Do you want to be shot by your government or bombed by Trump?
Yeah.
I think you're right. And it's so easy to sit back and talk about regime change and the importance of introducing more democratic controls and such like. But we know from relatively recent history that these things almost never go smoothly, that by design, the overthrowing of a government, particularly a massively authoritarian government, is messy and it's bloody and it goes on and on and on. And the chaos that spills out when you remove one strong group of people from the top of a country and pass that opening, give that opening to a whole bunch of other not quite so powerful people, it's not good news. It really isn't. And we've been here. We've been here before, with the caveat that we don't know what's been going on behind the scenes. But with the evidence that's in front of our own eyes, this wasn't a response to anything that we could describe as an imminent threat. And, Trump used the preemptive approach. This is very definitely a war of choice. And quite clearly, the United States and Netanyahu, obviously, have made a calculation that the regime in Iran is vulnerable, which, we would think it is. They're dealing with a very, very severe economic crisis. They've still got the fallout from that crackdown on protesters earlier this year. And so, they seem to have summed up that this is an opportunity that shouldn't be squandered, especially when they've moved all that military hardware into the area already. As you said, it's very hard to see how any sort of legal justification of self-defense could be brought to apply.
And it won't, and they don't care, I think is the point. But what's really worrying is that, in practical terms, the stated aim doesn't match the method. You can't bring about regime change by aerial bombardment. It's just not feasible, unless by regime change you mean flatten the entire country. In the way most people understand it, regime change effectively needs some element of boots on the ground, which are not there at the moment. So like I said, it's not even an aspiration. It's more like a hope that if we do this, maybe people on the ground, and that's the same people who will have had relatives slaughtered the last time they rose up a couple of months ago, encouraged by the US president that then was absent. And so you're counting on them to trust you and go for it. Maybe it will happen. I don't know. But that's not where it moves from. I'm quite sure of that. It moves from all kinds of other things. It moves out of Trump having acquired a taste for it after Venezuela and thinking, I can go there and they can give me however many billions worth of oil that I can then just put in my personal account. It is influenced by the fact that there's an election in Israel this year, and Netanyahu is slightly more popular than he was, but still not set for victory. And he knows that wars play well for hard right parties.
That's right.
In many, many ways, this is mostly not about Iran, which makes it particularly, I think, cynical and problematic.
I think cynicism is a very good emotion to bring to the table when something like this happens. I mean, this is one of these situations where we could really do with an Arthur Snell sitting in on us. Hello, Arthur, if you're listening in.
Well, he couldn't sit in today, but he's interviewing an expert, Charlie Gamble, for those who know, on Iran tomorrow, and we'll be putting out an episode in the early hours of Monday morning that brings everyone bang up to date. So I would advise people to go find the Behind the Lines podcast with Arthur Snell, our sister podcast, and subscribe or follow it, whatever is the term on your podcast app, so that when that episode goes live, it will pop up on your feed.
And hopefully he's going to address one of the most difficult questions from my perspective, which is the question around whether the attacks are actually going to be welcomed on the ground in Iran. Because I've got a sneaking suspicion that the idea that the strikes are going to be cheered by people on the ground is at best overly simplistic. Some dissidents and diaspora groups may well view them positively because they bring pressure on the regime. But we have to be quite clear that many Iranians, with good reason, distrust foreign intervention. And the protest movement itself is fragmented. It's focused primarily on domestic grievances. So the blanket notion of a unified welcome isn't really supported by available evidence. And that is very, very bad news, because regime change requires a new regime being ready to take over. And fragmented internal opposition forces make for a messy and a dangerous transition.
And I think, actually, Kenny, this is an aspect that is not talked about enough. There was a sense that alongside any kind of rhetoric of regime change, there was also a sort of program of democracy building. Now, I'm not saying this was successful. Plainly, it was also a disaster in most cases. Didn't work. But at least it had those two elements. It made internal sense. There was a logic to it. If you unplug the democracy building thing and just say regime change, you're essentially just coming in and rolling the dice.
Yeah, that's right.
In the hope that next time you'll get a 6.
And we also should remember that regime change is really not something that you can plan for over sort of 6 weeks. There's groundwork has to be done. There are organizations that have to be set up. There are people who have to be brought in. And the whole thing involves years and years and years of hard work and risk on the ground, and probably a whole bunch of money from the CIA and who knows where else as well. But it isn't something that you can sit down with Pete Hegseth and go, do you know what we should do next week? We should do some regime change. That's what we should do. That's just not how it works in the real world.
Quiet, Riot. Quiet, Riot.
I know that amongst all these conversations that this is hardly the most important aspect of what's going on. But what we saw this weekend is called Operation Desert Storm in Iraq, Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, A Just Cause. That's quite a grown-up one, isn't it? A Just Cause. Restore Hope in Somalia. You know, these operations have come with some relatively grown-up titles. But Epic Fury. It might well be that American foreign policy is best understood if we accept that it's being scripted by a couple of 14-year-old boys with a Beavis and Butthead fixation. Do you know what? That doesn't fill me with much confidence.
You know what? The other day I was editing an episode and I was playing it at a higher speed. And my other half pointed out that at a high speed, Trump sounds exactly like Eric Cartman.
This is the worst decision you've ever had in your life, practically. Jack's going to agree with me, right? But this is a terrible decision. And you have Hakeem Jeffries, he's a dope. And you have Chuck Schumer, who can't cook a cheeseburger. Of course these people are happy. But true Americans will not be happy.
Oh, he does. Respect my authority.
And once you've got that thought in your head, Epic Fury makes perfect sense because it's like, I'm pissed off at you guys. It seems like a really open acceptance of what this is. This is, we just don't like you, so we're going to bomb the fuck out of you. There's no further honorable cause to this. There's no justification. I mean, the whole thing, actually, Mar-a-Lago was used as a situation room again.
Yeah.
And a statement was released, a video made in Mar-a-Lago was released on Truth Social. Instead of the president doing an address from the White House, my fellow Americans, as has been the pattern in recent decades, really, to acknowledge the seriousness of taking lives, if nothing else, to acknowledge that this is not something you do lightly. You don't go and bomb the capital of another country because you're furious, epically so. That you have some sense of occasion and proportion. Again, that's not the most pressing issue, but it's another sign of a sort of degrading standards around the US administration. They're not serious people.
No.
And they have access to the most serious military right now.
Quiet, Riot.
Now, for avid election watchers, the wee small hours of Friday morning were something a little special. Voters in Gorton and Denton delivered a Green MP in an area that has been resolutely Labour for nigh on a century, with a decisive 40% of the vote, halting the progress of the reform bandwagon very comfortably and relegating Labour to third. The Conservatives and Lib Dems both lost their deposits. Some of the losing parties were less than gracious in defeat, lobbing some quite unpleasant allegations about. But newly anointed Green MP Hannah Spencer gave a cracking speech that may go some way to explaining why local voters chose her with such enthusiasm.
I am no different to every single person here in this constituency. I work hard. That is what we do. Except things have changed a lot over the last few decades, because working hard used to get you something. It got you a house, a nice life, holidays. It got you somewhere. But now, working hard, what does that get you? We know how it feels to be looked down on, maybe because we didn't do well at school, maybe because we do dirty manual jobs, because we are shut out of places we should be in. To people here in Gorton and Denton who feel left behind and isolated, I see you and I will fight for you. Because whilst our communities may sometimes be labelled in different ways, the thing everyone seems to have underestimated here, especially over the last few weeks, is how similar we all actually are. How we have common ground, how we get along, how we stand up for each other. Now, to my customers, I'm sorry, but I think I might have to cancel the work that you had booked in because I'm heading to Parliament. And when I get there, I will make space for everyone doing jobs like mine. We will finally get a seat at the table.
Alas, for property owners in Manchester, Hannah now must quit her day job as a plumber and turn her efforts to unclogging our political system from the many double flushers who appear to be affecting its normal flows.
So, aside from the plumbing of the nation, what does the result tell us, if anything, about the broader political picture?
Caveats, caveats, caveats. We don't need
Yeah.
to repeat them every time, but these are a snapshot. They are often affected by local reasons and demographics that may not be present in every other constituency. And so extrapolating from a sample of one to what's going to happen in 650 odd, let alone in 2.5 or 3 years' time, is a fool's errand. However, because we have another by-election quite recently, and also, more importantly in many ways, the by-election for the Senate in Caerphilly quite recently, it might begin to point to a pattern. If you can extrapolate any pattern from it, that pattern would be that the voters who really don't like reform, and their volume will vary from area to area, there will be other areas where there's not a huge majority that wants to stop reform, but actually that want reform. But in areas where there is a sort of progressive majority, it is extremely motivated to stop reform, but it is really not buying Labour's "we are the only choice if you want to stop reform," and tend to coalesce behind a progressive alternative. And that, I think, is a pattern that will, or at the very least should, worry Labour very much.
Without a doubt. I mean, it's something we discussed with Peter Kellner on Thursday's show, was the fact that research before the by-election had already shown that Green voters seem to be a lot stickier than Labour voters and were much less likely to switch allegiances for tactical purposes. So in other words, if tactical voting is going to happen, Starmer is the one who is more likely to lose out. The other takeaway that I had from the result was quite an encouraging one in some ways, because I was watching out for what in Scotland they call the scunner factor. People either voting for reform because they're fed up and want to burn the whole political system down and they'll back whoever is willing to do that, or staying at home, of course, because for the same reason that they're absolutely fed up. But actually what we saw was a very adult and a very unusual response from an electorate which seems to have plugged into politics in a way that we don't often see, I think it's fair to say, in this country, partly because of our electoral system and partly just because it's the habits that people get into. But the scunner factor didn't dominate this time, and it was almost the reverse of the scunner factor. Yeah, we understand that there's a threat here, and that threat is enough to get us not just to engage with politics, but to engage with it and to do it in a very conscious way and, take sides for actual reasons, beyond mere tribalism.
Yeah, and we saw that, I think, in her speech, didn't we, Kenny?
Yeah, I thought her speech was really, really very excellent. She sounded like an actual human, and she articulated actual, genuine human concerns about very straightforward things, about the cost of living, about the imbalance of wealth distribution. And she wasn't just clear, she was immensely authentic. And the other thing that really struck me was that though she was name-checking working people, working class people, her message really was resonating with this, what we've come to call the squeeze middle as well. In other words, everybody who isn't one of the lucky elite, everybody is getting squeezed and everybody is finding it harder to get the rewards that they deserve from working hard. They're finding it harder to be able to afford a holiday. Lots of them are finding it hard to be able to put food on the table. Lots and lots of them are still getting universal credit because they're not earning enough wages from working hard. So it was wonderfully straightforward communication and totally authentic, and contrasted just so starkly with what we saw from Starmer not many hours later.
I am one of the last holdouts when it comes to insisting on giving the government credit when it does things well, which it really doesn't get enough,
Yeah.
and criticizing it in a constructive way when it doesn't do things well. But I just thought Starmer's reaction the next morning was catastrophic. If I had scripted it to go worse, it couldn't. And I think that for three reasons. First of all, it is just strategically inept. If the idea is that you want some of those voters to come back to you, and how can it not be? Then going out on the notion that you're all wrong, 70% of this constituency, this previously safe Labour seat, 70% went for parties whose message was give Starmer a kicking, basically, to a certain extent. 70%. For you to react by saying, well, I'm right and you're all extremists, is just the worst possible thing you can do if you're hoping to get a fair hearing with those voters. I have seen Gorton and Denton voters online saying that I voted tactically because it seemed to me the most efficient way to keep reform out.
Yeah.
But I'm a Labour voter, or have been. And seeing that reaction from Starmer, I'm now tempted to say, well, I'm going to stick with the Greens then in my constituency.
They've given themselves permission to make a change in a seat that has been Labour for almost a century.
And so uncoupling it from whether it was fair or not, whether it was right or not, a lot of Labour people are pointing to certain leaflets that went out that seemed to, go for divisive lines along ethnic origin, photos of Starmer with Narendra Modi, in order to suggest to certain people that this man is not your friend. All of that, we've seen it happen in by-elections before. It's always distasteful when it does. It's always to be condemned. But that goes to whether Starmer's reaction was emotionally justified or not. And that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is it politically smart? Whatever its moral or emotional justification might be, it's politically dumb. Very, very often, constituencies like that swing back to you at the next general election. How many times have we seen that happen?
Yeah.
To go out the next day and say, well, that's because you're all extremists, isn't it? It's like the worst thing you can possibly do. It's like you're asking that constituency not to swing back to you at the next election.
Quiet, Riot. Quiet, Riot.
The second reason I think it's catastrophic is because he owns this one. We cut Starmer a lot of slack about, Blue Labour and McSweeney and bad advice and this secretary and the comms unit. And, this was all him. This was just him exercising awful political judgment. And it can't be written off in any other way. And I think the third reason, and probably the most worrying, is that I think it indicates a man in deep denial.
Yeah.
A man who is refusing to learn lessons, not just not learning lessons, actively refusing to lean into all that sectarian bullshit, as if 40-odd% in a constituency that used to be firmly yours, 40-odd% voted for another party that hasn't had more than 10% in any by-election in history, to turn around and say, oh, that's down to one leaflet that went out, is to simply refuse to recognize what you were talking about, that the basic message that the Greens were putting out is what appealed to 40% of that constituency. The basic message, which was, you're working hard and you're not getting a fair deal right now. This society is not working for you, and no one is listening. That's what got them 40%. To not recognize that and think you can go out and label everyone extreme except the 20-odd% that voted for you, it's just beyond the pale, really.
Yeah,
it's so
it is.
disappointing.
That the sectarian bullshit, as you called it, wasn't the only example over the piece of Starmer leaning into what I consider to be the wrong language for the leader of the Labour Party. The way he dog-whistled Green policies over, for example, the decriminalisation of drugs, or the way they want to change the ways sex workers are treated, was straight out of the Farage playbook. And if a dull technocrat like Starmer isn't able to have a grown-up discussion about themes like that, what on earth is the point of having a dull technocrat like Starmer then?
We had an excellent candidate, absolutely rooted in her community. But we were fighting the extremes of the right and the extremes of the left. We are changing lives. That's what we came into politics to do, to fight for the people who need better lives, not just identify the grievances. I will also fight against the extremes in politics, on the right and the left. And we will line up together in that fight against the extremes of the left and the right. They are the extremes in politics and the extremes of the left. And I will not stop fighting the extremes of politics, the extreme on the right in Reform, the extreme of the left in the Green Party.
Effectively, what you saw was hurt. What you saw was upset on display. Look, I think Starmer is toast, to be honest. But whoever comes in will have a hell of a mess to pick through. And the problem with it is this. Going into this by-election, what do you think was the second best result for Labour leadership? So if they lost, do you think they would rather have lost to the Greens or to Reform? Because in my view, they would rather have lost to Reform because it then served the fundamental message that it's either me or Farage. That's the strategy. Mm-hmm. So they could go out and say, this is what happens when you split the vote on the left. Reform will get in. What do you think was the worst possible result for everyone that votes Labour, everyone that works for Labour, volunteers for Labour, is in the local Labour Party? It's, of course, for Matt Goodwin to get elected. Mm-hmm. So a lot of Labour voters and even members and activists will have woken up on Friday morning relieved that, yes, they lost, but at least Reform didn't put that man in Parliament. They would have been relieved. When you get such a wide divergence between what the leadership wants and what the vast majority of voters would want, which is first and foremost not Matt Goodwin MP, you have evidence of a dysfunction. And that is not down to Starmer. That is down to the strategy they've chosen. The strategy they've chosen was to make the next election a straight shootout between them and Reform in the hope that people will choose them.
There was an interesting memo sent to the BBC from a trainee lawyer in Denton. Now, I don't know why she sat down and emailed the BBC, and you always have to ask the question, is this a party activist from somewhere? But she's called Rhian Warren Blades, and she explained that in choosing who to vote, the only goal for her household and for lots of her friends and neighbours as well was that they just didn't want a Reform candidate. That was the unifying element of the whole by-election. We need to keep Reform out, which only left them the choice of Labour and the Greens. She then gave 3 reasons why she and her friends probably dodged voting for Labour. First of them was Labour insulting the voters. Now, this predates Starmer's insults. Yeah. This, she was referring to offensive WhatsApp messages that were sent by the former MP for Gorton and Denton, Andrew Gwynn, and he got sacked as a minister and suspended for Labour for his trouble. And then he eventually resigned on grounds of ill health. And she said, you know, he made derogatory comments that were deeply insulting, and that scandal was already fresh in everyone's minds as they considered the vote. So that was point one. Labour have been dissing us. Then, crucially, I think, was the Barnum snub. We've covered it plenty of times before, but the sense of alienation that a lot of voters felt when Andy Barnum, who was at least a familiar politician, and we know how important that is, when he was locked out, and we got this idea that Starmer was putting his own career ahead of the voters and ahead of Labour. So, you know, she said Labour bulldozed a bridge that they'd already burnt down for many voters. Yeah. That was the final straw.
You know my thoughts on that. A very smart piece of chess by Andy Burnham, but really Andy Burnham would have been hoping to be blocked.
Yeah, I think so.
Because look at the conversation now. Everyone takes it as a given that Burnham would have won that seat. I look at that margin, and I'm not sure Burnham would have won that seat. But by not contesting it, he has won it convincingly in theory, which is the perfect place for Burnham to be right now.
It is, particularly with the May local elections coming up, where there's another world of pain, and he doesn't get associated at all with that world of pain. If he's got patience, this plays out as well as it possibly could for Andy Barnum. Couldn't have gone much better for him, I don't think. There was a final problematic element for Labour that was coming out of voters on the ground, and they were saying that Labour's campaigning was described as a lukewarm whisper. So Reform were spending a lot of money. The Greens had bussed in hundreds and hundreds of campaigners. There were green signs everywhere. And there was this feeling, and it's something that you've alluded to already, that Labour's message of we're the only ones that can beat Reform. But the Greens were doing it with more authenticity and they were more believable. So the Labour Party machine, which you'd think should have run roughshod, particularly in that sort of constituency, over an operation size of the Greens, looks to have come up short as well. Now, whether that is because people actually didn't want to be associated with an impending disaster, or whether it's just genuinely a weakness.
I think you've got something there, and I want to make it very clear that this is not about the personalities involved, because from everything I hear, Angeliki Storia is a really sterling local candidate.
Yes.
A really good local politician who has devoted most of her working life to that community. So I don't want this to seem like a dissing of her or her team or local volunteers, all of whom will have been working with the best motives in their heart. But it points to a sort of head office problem. And that was also reflected in Starmer's reaction. Everything I hear from Labour friends, when they go campaigning, if there is one phrase that comes up again and again that they send me, everyone on the doorstep is saying this, that phrase is, we don't know what Labour stands for anymore.
Yeah.
And so to think that a campaign will work on the message, it's either us or them, without going on to explain why it should be us, that's the bit that's missing. Again, to come out and say, they're all extremists on the right, they're all extremists on the left, we are the only ones that are sensible in the middle. When the message you've been getting back from voters is, we don't know what you stand for, to say, I'm going to stand for nothing even more resolutely, it seems to me a really quite extraordinary one, right?
Absolutely spot on, yeah.
Quiet Riot. This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
Quiet Riot. I suppose that we should turn to the Conservatives.
Do we have to?
I mean, it's just
700 votes.
700 votes. They lost their deposit. And, they were never expected to feature heavily in this by-election. A couple of thousand votes and they'd have been very, very happy indeed. But, losing their deposit while Reform, on a disappointing night for Reform, still charged home in second place, that has to speak volumes of some sort for the approach being taken by Badenoch.
There's something I need to point out, because Reform went round every studio saying that, in this Labour area, we came in second, which is nothing short of magnificent. They came in second last election. And I was dismayed that not a single person corrected them on this. Isn't glancing at what happened at the last election kind of basic prep? They were second last time. And actually, if you add up their percentages, the reversal is not really that extraordinary. If you add the numbers, the pure numbers, it's basically Conservatives plus Brexit Party. I think that's slightly overstated how well Reform did. They went around for some weeks before the election saying that they could do it easily. Suddenly now they're saying, well, we never really thought we could win this seat. And as I've pointed out in the past, there is some hubris creeping into Reform's swagger that I think is a much bigger danger than they've identified. Like, aside from politically naive, because you're not managing expectations, it's also incredibly un-British, to be honest, to be going around saying, we've got the next election in the bag. Zia Yusuf appearing on a podium with the words Shadow Home Secretary.
That might be the sharpest political observation you've ever made in this country.
Seriously?
Yes.
Honestly, what the fuck is that about? Shall I go and print a sign that says Queen of England? And again, no one was really pointing this out. Say, you're not Shadow Home Secretary. Stop acting as if you're somehow government in waiting. You're not even managing to win the seats that you're going for at the moment. Anyway, again, in combination with carefully, I think Reform are in trouble Their total share hit a ceiling and it's now on its way down. They're 4 or 5 points from their peak at 31%. On most aggregate polling, they're now on about 27. They've been announcing loads of shadow secretaries in various briefs that seems to have made little impact, to be honest.
Yeah.
And if you take this result in combination with carefully, what you're getting is that there is a level of sophistication, I think, from voters who may not agree on much, but definitely agree on the fact Farage is an asshole. And they might end up coming second in every constituency.
And this aspect of reform, I happen to think is crucial. People vote for people in the end. This is what happens. We talk about policies. We know that it's important that there's money in your pocket, but that personal thing is hugely important. And reform remains a one-man band. And the peak of their popularity, I don't think it's any accident that since that peak has been the period when Farage has been announcing more additions and more big names from the Conservative Party. He's bringing more people in and his popularity is dropping. At the same time, his focus has very much been on maintaining and building his friendships on the other side of the Atlantic as well. So there's a double aspect there, taking for granted the supporters that he has already and then failing to realise that in bringing in all these other has-beens, he dilutes his own brand.
Yeah.
And his brand is what's kept this party going.
I hear a lot about Kemi Badenoch's resurgence, but where is it in the polls?
If this is a
They've recovered,
resurgence,
not just in this by-election, where they maybe put no effort in, because probably they would quite like reform to have embarrassed the government. So I can understand that. But in the national aggregate polling, they are 1 point ahead from where they were 3-4 months ago at their depth on 16%. I keep hearing about Badenoch's brilliant resurgence, but I'm not seeing it. The statements she put out on the Gorton and Denton, can I just read you one small paragraph?
please do. Make me suffer.
If you stir up grievance politics between groups based on religion or race, as Labour have done for decades, as Reform are seeking to do, and as the Greens have done successfully in this by-election, you are pitting neighbour against each other, and you start to unravel the culture of tolerance that makes Britain great.
Culture of tolerance, Kevin.
And it's like, sorry, who, what? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
It's comical. Advance UK, it was their first electoral test. So how did they do?
This was fabulous. In the week that Tommy Robinson was being feted by MAGA in America, Advance UK came in just behind the monster-living Rooney Party. Was it Sir Oinkalot? I've forgotten his name. I think it was Sir Oinkalot.
I think it was Sir Oinkalot.
So yeah, there's still hope. The monster-raving Looney Party remain one of those sharp little pins you don't see until you stand in it at the last moment. And yeah, Advance UK sat in it with their fat arses, and boy, did they squeal.
Is there something that pops at you from the actual data, the actual result that we haven't covered yet?
The fragmentation is worth us flagging up. The fact that there is now fragmentation on the left and the right of the political divide, and the fact that it's populism that's really engaging people in politics. You know, Zach Polanski, by Green standards, is a very populist politician. Starmer is definitely not a populist politician, but he's tried to lean into it. Badenoch, we've heard, Farage, the ultimate populist politician in this country. So we do have the rise of fragmentation and we do have the rise of populism. So the foundational elements that I think help define how much engagement we get out of the electorate, those are changing. Whether we think that the rise of populism is a good thing or a bad thing, it's definitely a thing right now. And it's linked directly to this fragmentation as well. We were seeing a generational shift in the political balance. And I think that at some point, it's going to force some of the major players to start thinking a bit more seriously about electoral reform. I don't know how many years it takes. I don't know if I see it in my lifetime.
Or pacts, more formalized pacts, I think. But yes, the interesting thing is that Labour have chosen this strategy of saying it's either us or them. But in order for that to work, it all relies really quite heavily on people absorbing and internalizing the idea that you are the only party that can beat reform. And at the moment, people are really not doing that. They're saying, oh, what about those people? They seem nice. The only possible shift that I can see is one of extreme humility, Kenny,
Hmm.
to say, we hear you. And it's not that, before people get upset, it's not that Labour is not doing loads of good things. It is. It's doing loads of good things. It's not that there's not a lag between Labour doing loads of good things and those things beginning to sort of impact people's daily lives. There is, and it will become more apparent, more evident as time goes by, that those good things are having a positive impact. All of that is true. It's also true that Labour is doing a lot of stuff that's not good, and that they're doing loads of stuff that they change their minds about that makes them look indecisive. So there is also a lack of cohesion around that. But putting all of that aside, in order for people to choose you, you have first of all to secure a fair hearing from them. And at the moment, voters are not willing to listen to what they say. For whatever reason, good or bad, fair or not, they are not enamored with the messenger.
No.
Changing the message doesn't help when no one's listening. And like I said, I don't know what form that takes. It might be a massive reshuffle and a massive program of legislation that really rehabilitates the current administration as it is in people's minds in a really radical way. I can't see that happening,
Not going to happen.
especially after the reaction to this result.
No.
Or it needs a good new leader to say, look, we haven't been listening enough to people's concerns out there, and we're going to start now. That's really the only thing that can work.
I've considered Starmer to be a dead man walking for some months now. His polling figures have been underwater. The Barnum stuff, the Mandelson stuff, there's just one thing after another on top of the problems that Labour has had in terms of pissing off core elements of their support as well. But the thing about a crisis like that for a leader and indeed a leadership team, but for the party as a whole, is that creates an opportunity because it gives an organisation permission to say, right, we need a Hail Mary. We really need to throw everything at something, we need to come up with something that is high risk and something that we wouldn't really contemplate in more normal times. But these are not normal times. These are times when we've been pushed into third place.
Look, and they may have it and they may not. I'm not particularly, I don't have shares in Labour. If the Greens become the new dominant progressive party in the country and they end up romping to government with 40%, that'll be good enough for me. I don't have an issue with that. I may disagree with particular policies or particular presentation of things, but I do with Labour too.
Yeah.
That's how it works in a first past the post system. You choose the thing that keeps the worst of it out. But there needs to be a deep realization that we are in a different environment. And I don't think it's been fully absorbed at the moment. I think there are two really profound misconceptions at work. The first one is, and it was repeated by every single fucking political editor doing a piece to camera, that Labour are losing votes to both the right and the left. It's just not true. Look at the numbers. Look at the shift of voters. Labour lost a bunch of voters to Reform really early on, around the issue of the riots, actually, which was, as you know, I think completely cynically engineered. But they lost a bunch of voters to Reform at that point, but they ain't never getting back. And since then, they've been losing steadily and are still losing voters only to the left. And so proceeding on the notion that we're losing voters to both sides, therefore, how do we move to one direction when it will piss the other direction off? It's not true. It's not what's happening at the moment. You are losing voters hand over fist to your left. So the pivot you need to make could not be more obvious and has the magnificent advantage of being completely in keeping with your values as a party
First
and with your manifesto.
Yes.
Be Labour again and things might get better. So that's the first thing. The second misconception that I think they're working on is that parties of the centre-right, centre and centre-left need to be moderate not only in their policies, but in their implementation. And that's wrong too. Moderate policies can be implemented in incredibly radical ways as part of a big radical program of change. I think they are mired in this idea that somehow being moderate involves being very cautious and very deliberate and very slow in any changes you
very
make.
boring.
It's not true. It's just not true. You can implement center-left policies in a very decisive and immediate way. And if people saw that, they might start paying attention again. But at the moment, it's all become a swirl of received wisdom that says, oh, we have to be very careful in everything we do because otherwise people might consider us radical. And they're ignoring the fact that people are clamoring for radical. They are begging for radical. Why are you avoiding the thing that the whole country is telling you they want you to be?
There's a blockage somewhere. It sounds like we need a plumber.
A perfect way to tie things up, Kenny. Thank you.
Nicely done, Alex.
And that's all for this weekend's show. A heartfelt thanks for joining us again today, even though some of you must be fed up with politics after the last few days.
For our listeners, somehow I doubt that very much.
And I hope you didn't think, I was obviously quite annoyed. I hope you didn't think I was being very harsh on one side or another. I understand that good people are supporting various sides for really good, respectful, and honorable reasons. And I'm not denying that at all. I'm just frustrated when I see politicians saying we have to learn the lessons and then go on to not learn the lessons. Like, even when the lessons are so clear and plain, it's like, that wasn't the lesson.
Well, there is one lesson for our listeners, and that's if they want to pull us up on any of the things that we talk about, or indeed if they want to ask us questions about anything at all, we have got an Ask Us Anything session coming up online. One of those online meeting treats that we do as a way of saying thank you to our subscribers. So listen, if you want an invite, do make sure that you're backing us on ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod for as little as £5 a month. And it really is your chance to launch questions at us about anything and everything.
£5 to read me the Riot Act in a couple of weeks.
I'm going to spend a tenner to do it twice to you.
Cheaper, twice the price. We'll be back on Thursday with the main show. Until then, stay calmer than I have managed. Stay kinder than I have managed. And please keep rioting, but a bit more quietly than I have managed. Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese.
Quiet Riot.
It's a perilous moment for the Middle East and, by extension, for everybody else. 2, while the pretext for America's attacks is Iran's controversial nuclear facilities, the end game...
Sorry, darling. Do you want to do that sentence again?
Did that all go wrong? Quite. I was hearing it going, I'm not sure if that made any sense.
Moment for the Middle East, and 2, by extension, I am saying some words now.